Charlotte, Charlotte, Charlotte. What are we going to do with you? I'm so conflicted with this character because I think she has some of the coolest animations for a 4-star character, yet we need to analyze her main role as a healer. I mean seriously, if these camera normal attacks aren't some of the slickest catalyst attacks in this game, I don't know what to say to you. Anyways, I digress. Charlotte's main role is a healer, and as always, this guide will cover Charlotte's best artifacts and weapons to general playstyle and team compositions. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. Charlotte does her best Nahida impression with her elemental skill, but don't expect too much out of it. Her tap skill will quickly deal damage to enemies in a rectangular area in front of her, and then mark up to 5 opponents hit to take additional cryo damage over time. When using her tap skill, this mark effect will last for 6 seconds, dealing 4 ticks of cryo damage for every 1.5 seconds. On the other hand, with Charlotte's hold skill, this is where she tries to do her best Nahida impression and goes into lens mode to mark enemies. Unfortunately, you actually have to make sure that enemies are within the camera's rectangle before releasing the skill button to ensure enemies are marked, which is something that Nahida does not need to do. If you hold Charlotte's skill, you'll want to make sure to hold for at least 2 seconds until the rectangular area expands. This is what the game calls her finisher state, which enhances her skill to mark enemies for 12 seconds and deal 8 ticks of cryo damage with that same 1.5 second interval. Charlotte's burst brings out the paparazzi to heal the entire party for a huge amount of HP on cast based on her attack. Afterwards, she leaves a field that simultaneously deals cryo damage to enemies and heals the active character in the field for 4 seconds. The biggest catch here is the large party heal she provides, which even rivals that of Jean or Baiju. With her second Ascension passive, she can grant herself 5% healing bonus for every Fontanian in the party, and non-Fontanians instead grant 5% cryo damage bonus. This is just a small boost that can make Charlotte's healing even more potent in situations with characters like Farina, who actively want as much healing as possible. Probably the biggest downside of Charlotte is her energy generation. As a 4-star with burst healing that can rival 5-star characters, there's no way that it wouldn't come without a catch. That catch is, of course, energy. Charlotte's burst has a standard energy cost of 80 with a cooldown of 20 seconds. Her tap skill generates 3 cryo particles and her hold skill generates 5 cryo particles only if she reaches the finisher state after holding her skill for about 2 seconds. Although it's not Farazan levels of bad, it's pretty lackluster for that high 80 energy cost. Players should expect to build at least 200% energy recharge at C0 and also pair that with an energy-based catalyst. Without a catalyst that has an energy regen passive, this number skyrockets even further, so we'll cover those best catalyst options to look out for in the weapon section. As for Charlotte's cryo application, it's a pretty slow rate, but in her case as a healer, that's a good thing. Her skill's mark effect will apply cryo every other hit, and her burst field exercises the standard 3 hit rule and will apply cryo 3 times over its 4-second duration. These rates of applications are great for teams like Hyperbloom, where she can occasionally freeze enemies to allow the Dendro aura to exist on enemies, and also vaporize teams with her infrequent cryo application that freezes with Hydro instead of melts with Pyro. Overall, she has pretty low energy generation and a standard rate of cryo application, which is expected of new 4-star characters. Artifacts for Charlotte are about as standard as you can get when it comes to a healer. Her most consistent option is the 4-set Noblesse Oblige, despite how long of a cooldown and how high of an energy requirement Charlotte has. Surely, Hoyoverse wouldn't release a healer set that grants a damage percent buff instead of attack percent, because that would be so good for characters who don't scale on attack like Farina or Nouvellette. Until that happens, Noblesse is your go-to option for attack-based damage dealers. The 4-set Tenacity of the Millelith is a substitute for the 4-set Noblesse, given that her skill can constantly deal damage to enemies to grant the 20% attack buff from the 4-set effect. The only issue with Tenacity is that in order for its buff to have a longer uptime than Noblesse, you'll need to be using Charlotte's hold skill all the time. Otherwise, it's just a worse version of Noblesse Oblige. For any non-attack scaling damage dealers, Charlotte unfortunately doesn't have any artifact set that can buff their damage as mentioned earlier. Usually that means you're either running the 4-set Ocean Hued Clam or a 2-set combination like the 2-set Emblem of Severed Fate with either a 2-set that grants attack or healing bonus. The 4-set Ocean-Hued Clam is only recommended with constellations like C1 and C6 that drastically increase Charlotte's ability to provide healing after her burst's initial cast. That's why a 2-set Emblem plus something like a 2-set Ocean-Hued Clam is such a safe option for Charlotte, especially if you only have C0 because it can really help you reach those energy requirements. Artifact stats are the standard ER or attack percent in the Sands, attack percent in the Goblet, and healing bonus in the Circlet. If you can get to 200% energy recharge without a main stat Sands, perfect, but otherwise ER Sands is highly recommended to make your life easy when it comes to building Charlotte. Healing bonus is standard in the Circlet unless you decide to run Favonius Codex, which can also use a crit rate Circlet to ensure the consistency on its passive. Substats are just like main stats with the emphasis on energy recharge and attack percent, and then any defensive stats like HP or defense afterwards, because Charlotte is a squishy character given that she's an attack-based healer instead of an HP-based healer. You'll never know when those HP and defense stats can save you while charging up her hold skill. Weapons are probably the most important part of this Charlotte guide. There are very few, but all very accessible options that can ensure Charlotte is able to have her burst ready off cooldown. Probably the best option for Charlotte is the prototype Amber. Although Charlotte gets no benefit from the HP percent stat other than tankiness, this Catalyst passive is probably one of the best pure supportive passives for Catalyst at the moment. The energy refund can lower Charlotte's energy requirement from impossible to reach down to a much manageable level like the 200% benchmark that I talked about before. Not to mention, the party-wide healing from the passive is also an extremely valuable asset with the release of Fontaine characters like Farina or Risley who constantly need healing. Favonius Codex is the only weapon that comes close to the prowess of Prototype Amber. The energy particles generated by the weapon's passive come in clutch not just for Charlotte but also any other teammates that are energy hungry. With Fav Codex, its energy recharge main stat also makes it possible to reach 200% energy recharge without an ER Sands, which is an important point to note. Other than these two options, players can try Oathsworn Eye or Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers for catalysts. Oathsworn Eye is an Enkonomiya event limited catalyst from patch 2.5, but for players that have it, Charlotte is one of the only characters that can really benefit from both its attack percent main stat and energy recharge passive. While not as good as Prototype Amber or Fav Codex, it is by far the best third place option. On the complete flip side, Thrilling Tales suffers from its lack of energy recharge and HP stat instead of attack percent. While the 48% attack buff for a teammate may seem enticing, this usual support option puts a lot of pressure on your artifacts to get copious amounts of energy recharge, and I usually don't recommend it over the other three options for Charlotte. When looking at Charlotte, many players consider teams with Farina. These two always seem to be attached at the hip right now because for players without Baiju or Jean, Charlotte is the go-to option for party healing given that Charlotte's debut is on Farina's banner. As I mentioned in my Farina guide, you can put Farina in pretty much every team as long as you pair her with a healer, and for purposes of this guide, that advice stays the same when pairing Farina and Charlotte. For the sake of variety in the guide, let's cover some teams that I think don't need Farina or don't always have space for her. One team that does have space for Farina but doesn't necessarily utilize her enormous damage percent buff is pure Hyperbloom. Like many other Cryo characters, Charlotte actually works fine in Hyperbloom because her Cryo can create freeze reactions to allow the Dendro aura to remain on the enemies and create more Dendro cores over the course of your rotation. The team will consist of Charlotte, your Dendro Applicator, your Hydro Applicator, and either Kuki Shinobu or Raiden for Hyperbloom triggers. If your Hydro Applicator is off-field like Xingqiu or Yelan, then your Dendro character must be on-field like Alhaitham or Nahida. The vice versa is also true, where if you use a character like Ayato or Child, you'll need an off-field Dendro with characters like Nahida or Dendro MC. Catalyst characters like Kokomi and Nahida can be both on-field or off-field thanks to their skills and normal attacks, which allows for more flexibility with your roster of characters. A team with a physical carry is a situation where the pairing of Charlotte and Farina can provide a large damage boost to the team, but there isn't always space for the both of them. Charlotte will always be great with physical carries because she provides a little bit of buffs with her artifacts and extra energy to the team, especially with Favonius Codex. Charlotte plus either Eula or Firmine is the core of the team, and then you can decide whether to run double Electro or a third Cryo character in the final slots. Especially with Eula's massive 80 energy cost burst, you may find it necessary to run a character like Rosaria or Shenhe for extra energy and offensive buffs instead of Farina. However, should a character like Fermine not require more than Charlotte for energy, it should be pretty easy to run either double off-field electro characters like Beidou, Fischl, etc. for Superconduct and raw electro damage, or just a single electro character for Superconduct with Farina in the final slot. Last but not least, we have the quintessential team for Cryo characters, which is Freeze. There's not much to say about this team with Charlotte specifically, aside from the attack percent buff she can provide from Tenacity or Noblesse, plus some Cryo energy particles for the team. Get Charlotte, your favorite Cryo DPS, a Hydro Applicator, and an Animo character with the 4-set Viridescent Veneer, and you're set for a Freeze team. Of course, having either Farina or Kazuha in the Hydro and Animo slots respectively will greatly improve the performance of Freeze teams because they cannot utilize reactions for extra damage, but they are not mandatory and just highly recommended. Other options include the standard Xingqiu, Yelan, Kokomi, or Mona for the Hydro slot, while other Animo options include characters that can easily group enemies such as Sucrose or Venti, or Sayu and Jean if you need extra healing when paired with Farina. With that, I have nothing else to discuss, so let me know your thoughts and teams for Charlotte down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this guide or thought it was useful, be sure to support both the video and the channel. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.